Hi, and welcome to 2023, which will be another amazing year. Let's start it with looking into RxDart, and more specifically with the TimerStream. I will have a look, and maybe soon after that there will be other videos which will be explaining a couple of other streams and functions that we have available in this library. If you have any specific structures over here that you would like to learn about, then please leave a comment and maybe I will look into them. But for more content like this, please subscribe and like this video. But for now, let's move on and let's look into the TimerStream. So first of all, you can see that you can use TimerStream in two different ways. So you can either instantiate this TimerStream class or you can use this static method RxDart. In my example, I will use the class itself. So let's navigate to it. And this is a very simple API over here. It has a constructor. The constructor takes a value of a type t, so it can be whatever. And then the second parameter is duration. This means basically that it constructs a stream which emits a value after a specified duration. So if you give it 3 seconds, it will emit this value in 3 seconds. And then down here you can see that there is plenty of properties, plenty of methods, but all of them are basically inherited from the stream interface. Because the TimerStream is inheriting from stream and of course from object as well. I have a simple example that I've constructed over here. And in this example, I'm creating this TimerStream with some done string, and we have a duration of 2 seconds right now. Then I'm printing waiting over here, and then over here we are listening to this stream, and when this time has elapsed, then we will print the event. Now let's try this out. So we are waiting, and after roughly 2 seconds over here we see done. Before we will look into the TimerStream code, we have also realized that because it is inheriting from the stream interface itself, so it also has to take care of a couple of things. And if I comment over here this code that I've created, then you can see that what we can do always with a subscription, we can pause it and we can resume it. So in my example here we have this TimerStream waiting for 2 seconds to emit. Here we are waiting for 1 second. After 1 second we are pausing. And then after another 3 seconds we are resuming. So let's run it again. And now we're waiting a little bit longer, but you can see this waiting over here. Waiting, and in roughly what was 6 seconds, or should have been, we can see the done right now. Therefore, let's go into the TimerStream. And here is the code, here is the implementation. So first of all, we are extending the abstract class stream with a type generic type t. And then we have a controller over here. So when you are using this TimerStream, then you cannot use your own controller, you cannot pass a controller to it. So this limits you a little bit what you can do with this stream, but that's the whole idea. This stream is going to do only one thing. After a certain time, it's going to emit a value. Thus, you should not be able to have an access to a controller, because you could modify this stream so it wouldn't do anymore what it is supposed to do. Then in the constructor, as we've seen in documentation, we get these two parameters, value and duration, and then we pass them here into the build controller method. And this build controller method is building a controller which is then stored in this value over here. Over here we are overriding the listen method, and all we do over here is we are just passing this call to a controller. And the last method that we have in this implementation is this build controller method over here. You can see that it's taking the value and duration as we've seen above. In the body of this method we have first a couple of variables or finals. And first of all, we have this watch, which is a stopwatch. So if we have a look into the stopwatch over here, there's a couple of things to take a look here. So first of all, a stopwatch which measures time while it's running. The second sentence, very important, so a stopwatch can be stopped. So it can be started, stopped, and when it's stopped, then it's not counting the time. And finally, it measures all the time that passed when it's not stopped. So every time it's running, it's measuring the time. So it's starting with 0 and it keeps going. Pretty much the thing that maybe if you ever had a PH classes in your school that the teacher maybe was carrying with him when he was measuring how fast you are running. At least that's what happened to me. Let's go back. Secondly, we have a timer. It's also counting time, but in the opposite way. If we will go into the documentation over here, and then in the first sentence over here, you can see that it's a countdown timer that can be configured to fire once or repeatedly. So at the time when stopwatch is counting from 0 to infinity when it's running, then the timer is counting from a given value to 0. And then when the timer finished counting to 0, then it will fire some event. So this is exactly what we want for our stream. Then we have a controller that we will create, and we also have the currently elapsed time. So we start with 0 and then we can store how much time elapsed until something happened. Then here we have a function defined on resume. Let's have a look into it in a moment. But down here you can see we have our controller again, and we are assigning it a stream controller. Down here you can see that we also specify that it's a synchronous controller. So instead of a stream controller, it could be just a synchronous stream controller also assigned over here. And then over here we have a couple of callbacks. So first of all, what happens on listen, then on pause, on resume, and on cancel. And this is exactly why I've shown you this extended example when we are pausing and resuming, because the stream interface allows us to get a subscription when we listen to something, and then we can pause and resume this subscription. So our TimerStream is also to support that. In the onListen method, we are starting by starting the stopwatch. Then we are also initializing timer over here. So this is a new instance of timer with the duration, the initial duration. And then we also specify a callback, what happens when the timer went down to 0, counted down to 0. In our case, we will then add an event to the stream or to the controller, which will eventually emit it in the stream. And then we are doing a cleaning by closing the controller. And then if our stream ever gets paused, then we are first of all cancelling the timer, cleaning it up, and then we are setting it to null. After that, we are also stopping our stopwatch. Then in onResume, we have this method over here, which was defined up here for some reason. Alright, so here we are in the onResume method. And first of all, we check two things. If the total elapsed time is null, then we don't want it, then we return, then we cannot resume, because that means we never really started. And secondly, we also are checking over here whether the timer is not null. And if the timer is not null, then it means that we did not pause this stream, because as you could see here in the pause method, then we are stopping the timer and setting it to null, or cancelling and setting it to null. After that, we are starting the stopwatch again. So we stopped the stopwatch and on pause. Here we are starting it again, so it will keep counting. And before we do that, we just take the current elapsed time. So we have our total elapsed time, which was set to 0. And then in the stopwatch, as you can see, the value was kept, how much time passed from that time, from when we paused it. We can add it to the total elapsed time, so we know how much time passed when we resume it. And finally, we create a new instance of a timer. Just this time, instead of setting it with the initial duration, we set it with the initial duration and we subtract the already elapsed time. So we will only count down to the time that is left. And over here, when the timer is done, we are setting exactly the same callback as down here in the onListen method, which I believe could be reused over here. Now in the onCancel method, all that happens is we again cancel the timer, and then we are also setting it to null, and finally we also set the total time elapsed to null. And that's the whole implementation. In the end, of course, we have to return the controller down here. So finally, let's also talk, why do we have these two concepts over here? Why do we have a stopwatch, which is counting to infinity, and why do we have a timer that is counting down to 0? Why don't we use just one of them in order to count the time? First of all, the stopwatch, it can only be started and stopped. And it cannot trigger an event when we get to some point. So when we want to wait for 3 seconds, for example, a duration of 3 seconds, then it will not fire a callback after the 3 seconds. We cannot give it a callback that will be fired after 3 seconds. This is something that the timer can do. So when we create a timer, like for example, over here, we give it the duration, and then we give it some callback. And the timer is defined that when it counts down to 0, then on 0 it will fire a callback. And this is our callback that will get fired. So the second question is, why don't we just use a timer and skip the stopwatch? And the answer for that is that we cannot pause or stop a timer. A timer, once started, it will keep counting down. Therefore, we have to combine these two concepts of counting down and counting up. I hope you learned today a little bit about the TimerStream and maybe about streams altogether. And if so, then subscribe to this channel. But for now, I coach you to death and I'll see you the next time. Bye bye.